another video. It's actually the same day as the last video I uploaded, which was part 19. This is now part 20, and the turbo is off again. The problem being that if you have the turbo bolted up on there and the studs are inserted in the turbo, you can't get the elbow on. So I have dropped the turbo again to try and get it on, but there's 5 studs. 4 are easy to get at. 1 is at the back rear side, and it's a complete arse to get at. So I am contemplating what exactly to do. What I might do is put 4 studs and then put 1 bolt in through the 5th one, and I'll whip this whole out of the car so I can explain what's actually going on. Well, right now I can't even get the downpipe out of the engine bay because I haven't got the car high enough. It's a right arse of a thing because the first joint is all the way back there, supported on that cardboard box. It's actually quite a long section, so you can't actually get it into the car unless the front of the car is really high. I don't quite know what I'm going to do yet, but basically the problem is that fixing there, because it is right under the belly of the elbow, which means you cannot get a nut or a stud on it easily. So I'm going to go do some head scratching. Right, the only way of getting it out was to jack the car very much higher, which I've now done. You can see the problem. That is a standard M8 exhaust stud. Through that hole, you've barely got enough room to put a nut on it, which is really annoying. So the only easy way of doing this is either cut the stud down till it's barely big enough to put the nut on, but even when you do that, you would have to feed the downpipe onto the stud and then turn the nut at exactly the same time for that to work. The other option is to put a bolt through, but there isn't enough bending room to get it in there, so I think I'm going to have to go with option number 1 and just accept that any time the turbo has to come off this car, you either have to take the whole manifold off or take the turbo off the manifold and pull the whole downpipe out. So not a particularly elegant solution, but that's all I can think of. You can't really even shave any meat off here because it's around that bolt hole that still constrains it. So yeah, it's just one of those things I'm going to have to live with. Incidentally, that is the original downpipe and how that one's done. It's bolted and basically does a much tighter turn, is quite restrictive, and that's why people make these aftermarket large diameter ones which have a very generous mouth and then curve around gradually. So good for power, a complete pain in the balls to fit. Well, that was a monumental pain, but I now have that on there with all 5 studs and bolts and more of those Driftworks locking nuts. I just hope that that whole assembly will now thread through the front of the car and go in, because obviously when I pulled that out I didn't have the turbo on the end of it. So yeah, wish me luck. I might be crying in a minute. You know, I said I might be crying in a minute. That does not want to go. When I didn't have the turbo on, I had a little bit more play, and I was able to rotate it round and in. Something's not going on here. I'm going to wrestle with it a little bit longer. After that, I'm just going to give up for a little while. Just when I think I'm winning. You might think that's a result, because it is in there. I had to take the lambda sensor out of the elbow to do it. But now we have a new problem. On the front of this engine, down behind here, is a little lug, and at the moment, I'll try to film it from beneath so you can see what I'm on about. Basically, that lug, where is it? There, is stopping the downpipe going back far enough, which is of course a complete ball ache, because now I need to pull that all forward again so I can get in there with a grinder and murder it, which is very, very, very frustrating. If you're ever doing this, that's the little lug that's causing the problem, and that's the grinder that's going to fix the problem. That, ladies and gentlemen, has been one massive pain. It's in and it's bolted up, but please, I really hope this thing doesn't develop a problem that has to come off again, because that is a real, well, I've said it before, probably labouring the point, but yeah, look how close that is there. We are talking less than a Rizla paper. The actuator I've put in fits perfect, so I'm happy with that. It's adjusted up right, everything's done up tight, everything's done up with nylock, or not nylocks, but proper locking washers, new gaskets, so I really hope it doesn't develop a fault. But yeah, as I said, that is a real bitch. Lambda sensor can go back in now. Really, I think I'm going to go find my radiator, start mocking all that up. I still need to buy a little rubbery O-ring thing for that, but other than that, I think I'm kind of done in around that front area. Oh yeah, the drain for the turbo as well. Then when my other unions come up, they can go in, and it's just a plumbing job after that. And then wiring. Yippee! As design ideas go, this is probably not a great one. You've got the turbo oil return to the sump right above the very, very hot downpipe. So because of that and the additional paranoia it causes, I'm using new gaskets and some of this copper silicon. It's really good stuff. I've used it on other turbo cars like my other black Nissan, and it just seems to be the daddy. I actually smeared a little bit around the coolant pipe as well coming out of there the other day. So yeah, not a lot of it, because obviously I don't want this to break down and then be the source of a leak. I just want a tiny smear so that when it's trapped between the two surfaces, it probably do a little bit in addition to what was originally there. That's the original gasket, and it's a bit like the oil pump one where they're like, I don't know, sprayed with some sort of polymer with a tin in the middle, and then when it compresses and it acts as a sealer as well. So rather than relying on compressed steel, which is what I think these things do, they've got a stamp in them. Well, anyway, just general chatting. I'm going to shut up and screw it all together. Once again, what was supposed to be quite an easy, straightforward bolt-up job is turning into something rather more complicated. You might notice that the flange for the top of the oil drain doesn't align with the turbo core, and that is because one of these bolts, that one back there, is preventing it from going across and hitting it. That's super aggravating, because I haven't touched any of these and I haven't rotated the core relative to the turbine, the turbine housing. So why that's not fitting, I really don't know. But anyway, all I can think of doing is pull that out, chop it at the back, and then hope there's enough meat to hold it up there. Grr. Well, I've really fucked that up. I sanded that bit off, caught it with the grinder, and thought, that looks suspicious. So I put a bar in there and opened it, and it just split where I'd caught it with the grinder. So that is now junk. I need to find a better solution altogether. Something that will fit on there, and it will basically not leak oil. There must be so many other off-the-shelf solutions for this, because this is such a common turbo that yeah, there just must be something straight off eBay. So I'll go away and have a look now. Most unsatisfying. I'm in the lab at work again, playing with drive shafts. I have a lot of drive shafts now, but this is 2 pairs of shaft assemblies, the correct length for a T20 or a T16 conversion in a bubble. These ones with the larger reluctor rings, or the fewer number of teeth, I think are off a 220 Turbo. These ones with the larger number of teeth and smaller spacing, I think, are from a diesel Rover 25 or 200, but basically that's a matched pair. And then again here we have the shorter ones. One of these has a reluctor ring on it. I think that's again Rover 25 diesel, and that is one doesn't have a ring on, so it's probably just out of some random old Rover. I have bought myself new outer CV joints because all of the ones on these have a lot of play in them. You can actually feel the rotary play between the shaft and the outer of the joint if you twist them. That one's particularly bad. The short ones are both actually okay. I think that's just the way they get loaded, but either way I'm going to go through the whole lot and pick the best pair of shafts, gearbox joints, and then I'll put the new CVs on the outer ends of whatever pair of shafts I select. One of these, I think, annoyingly, the inboard end gator is gone as well, so I don't have one of them at the moment, but I'll get hold of one and fit that at a later date. This is the first shaft I've selected. Basically, when you clamp that in the vise, there is minimal rotary play in that. Of course, there will be some that way, but rotary, it's okay. That gator's alright. That dampener has slid in the wrong place, but that can be bonded back in. The workshop manual tells you where you need to put it relative to the end of the shaft, so I'll take a reference measurement. This end I've pulled the gator back, and basically to separate it there is a circlip in the end of the joint. That's the new one. Basically you have to smash the joint off by hitting the inner ring there. So it's messy, which is why I've cleaned the worst of the grease off and then put a glove over it so when it drops on the floor it doesn't splat everywhere and I don't get shouted at by colleagues. Well, that really was remarkably easy. I was expecting to have to absolutely belt that, but one sharp tap with a chisel just on that face there and it just pinged off. That's the old circlip ring. You can see that they do get damaged a little bit. Where is it? Just there. It's kind of, oops, ovaled over a little bit. There. So it's a good job you get a new one with a kit. So what I'm going to do is clean that out, then I'll slide my new ring on gator. I'll replace that circlip, I guess it is a circlip, kind of, just doesn't have ears and tangs on it like a normal one would. Slide that on. Then with the kit you get a new pack of grease, so I'm just going to shove that in there and make sure it's pressed in to all of those grooves, same as you would wheel bearing. Then once the new ring is on, I can tap that on, and we just repeat the process a number of times and we're done. Just released the old circlip and you can see how mangled it is. That didn't bend as I was taking it off. That's just probably people fitting and removing CV joints off the end. But anyway, got a nice new one to go on now, which I'll fit somehow, probably need two hands. Okay, new end is on, so I just pushed it up and then with that little screwdriver pushed the circlip together and then gave it a very light tap and it just slid on. But I know rod ends and stuff like that are always tight when you first fit them and they will wear in. That makes a hilarious grinding noise, so yeah, I can only assume that's because it's a new part and it's not Rover, it's a pattern part, but yeah, I'll just fit it and see how it does. Certainly there's no radial plate, or is it axial or radial? I can never remember, but basically it feels tight as a drum. So a whole packet of lube is in there, and I've just worked it in and around with my finger. Now I can put the boot on and put the new snap rings, or let's see, clip rings on. Boot is on. I'm now just installing the clip ring. There is a special tool for doing this, but I always find if you are careful, you can put a screwdriver through there and then just use to lift that up so that you get nice crisp edges on the end. Then you can just use a pair of side cutters to close it up, which tightens it, but that's a two-handed job. Operation complete. One new, albeit very stiff, CV joint end on the correct drive shaft with the correct reluctor ring for my car. So, happy days. On to drive shaft number 2. This is the better of the two short drive shafts, but just as an indication of the difference between the new joint and the old joint, there's really loads of play in that. I don't know whether you can hear this or see it, but it is goosed. No idea what that sounded like on a car, but probably not very good. I mean, it's not horrific, but yeah, it's pretty worn. The longer drive shafts, because this end of the shaft doesn't articulate as much because it's on such a long reach, those gaiters are actually good on both drive shafts, both longer ones. So I'm going to take that gaiter off and refit it to this end because that one's going. It hasn't gone yet, but and also the inboard end isn't technically an MOT fail, but you know, might as well fit a decent one. I've been semi-successful. I've got the other joint on. That was a lot harder to drive on for some reason, even though I compressed the ring. I started taking that end apart, but it doesn't pop off, same as the other ones, so I want to go home and check the book and see actually how they're meant to come apart. If I can't separate that joint, then I'll just buy a universal gaiter stretch boot thing and slide it on, paint them up, fit them in the car. We should be good. And then I've got some other bits and pieces for the scrap pile, but I've made a mess now, so I'm going to have to tidy up and then go home. There's a follow-up to those drive shafts. Turns out the inboard end or gearbox end you can't dismantle, so I'm glad that I didn't persevere smashing it with a hammer, because it doesn't just pop off with a split ring like the outboard end does. So in the end what I did was, I didn't want to, obviously I wanted to change that gaiter there, so what I should have done is taken the end off again, stripped everything off, slid a new boot on, and then put it all back on together again. But I didn't want to do that because that would involve buying another snap ring for there, so I just bought a universal stretch boot and slid it over the top. And then I've given them a quick coat of that black engine enamel. In other news, I've been mocking up the radiator fans and the coolant pipes, so I know what goes where. Some of these are new, some of these are an old second-hand silicone elbow kit, and they're a bit grubby. I bought them ages ago. They all work fine, but I think for the level of detail I've gone in other bits of the car, I'm actually going to buy a whole new silicone set in red. There's an 8 to 10 week waiting list for them because they have to be custom made, so that's annoying. I've also been trying to get my head around the wiring. I thought this was going to be fairly straightforward, but it turns out it isn't, because lots of the information you get online are about wiring up the MG ZRs and fitting the Rover 220 Turbo loom. This wasted spark one works quite differently. It's batch fired, doesn't have the charging loom running through it. Because it's a Rover 800, the point between the engine harness and the body harness is in a different part of the engine bay, and the two looms get different feeds from the two engine bay fuse boxes. They're not interchangeable. The K-series engine, which this car originally had, would have had the fuel pump relay in a module in the engine bay sat down here, whereas the Rover 800, which runs that engine, has the fuel pump relay in the car. So basically it's not plug and play. There's a lot of fanning around. I have been sent the rave wiring diagrams, or like the rave, which is Rover's like all singing all dancing workshop manual system. So I've been able to identify all the pins in that plug there, which is part of the body loom, and that's where the original K-series loom, engine loom, would have picked up its feeds. So I know what's going on at that plug, I think. It's been a little harder to work out what's going on the Rover 800 loom, but I think I'm getting there now. Been having a bit of a tidy up today, just of my garage in general. I've bought some of those little blue stackable boxes and just separating everything up into its different sizes and all the rest of it. Drive shafts still aren't in, they're sat there. It rained last night. I've got my turbo feed hose in finally, and I've put some protective heat shrink, well not heat shrink, but you know, that Kevlar heat reflective webbing over the top just to stop it from melting on the turbo, which would be bad. I still haven't finished the drain. I've had all sorts of problems. I basically started with the original drain and it was my intention to use that. My first one was dented and beat to hell like this, so I couldn't use that one. I bought a second hand one, but because I'd rotated the core, the mounting flange was hitting on one of the housing bolts, so I tried to sand it to relieve it enough so that it would fit, but I accidentally caught the corrugated steel bit and put a hole through it, so I couldn't use that one. Then I bought myself a universal kit which looked like this, which basically didn't fit for a number of reasons, but more worryingly it had this weird plastic core inside, which meant that when you bent it and manipulated it, it just cracks and compresses flat like that. So it's not even rubber in there, it's some sort of shite that can't go around complex curves, which isn't really going to work in this application. So I binned that off, and then my cunning plan was to use the smaller flanges, which this has, which clears the bolt, and then make up an adapter welding the two together, and that will work. But in the meantime, I found somebody else selling one of these original pipes in good condition, so my plan is to revert back to standard, which is the best. In other news, I've put my headlights in just for a bit of a mojo boost really, and because I was tidying up and it thought, well, there's no reason why they can't go on the car now. This has revealed a number of problems. One is that where the body shop put the new front end on, they didn't sort of tidy this area up with fill or anything. That's where they've spot welded it or plug welded it through, and it just looks a bit shite. It's the same story over here, which is annoying, so that will have to be addressed. It's actually the same wherever you look where they've welded it, which is a real shame, because, you know, I'm a bit of a stickler for detail, so if that was mine, or if I'd done it, I would have, you know, welded it fully and dressed it, and maybe it really needs a little bit of filler. Unfortunately, I've now already covered all of this in wax oil stuff, so that's going to be fun getting that out, but it annoys me too much, so I will have to do that myself and then brush paint it. There's a couple of bits which might need to go back to the body shop, not because there's anything that they've done wrong particularly, but you can see the top of this wing doesn't line up with the headlight, and it's only apparent when you put the headlight in. Basically the wing has been dropped and bent, so you can see the crease from this side, it's buckled in here, so really that one needs pulling up and fixing. So again, that'll probably need paint, which is really annoying because that'll be me spending more money, and also having to take the car back up to Shropshire, which is quite a long trek. But anyway, I'm nattering on now, just going to keep tidying up and tinkering away. Maybe I spoke too soon. I've just been massaging that area with a hammer and an old rag. Then using my finger pressure, I've managed to get that somewhere close. It's not perfect. Obviously that's sitting up at the moment. If you tuck it in, it looks better. But at least it has the right curve in it now. It's still slightly low here. Whether or not that's going to be an issue depends on how the bonnet fits, which I don't know yet. This wing, incidentally, I can still move in and out if I need to sort of trick the eye, and that seal as well. I can push the headlight back in and out. It's all going to be compromises with the front bumper and all the rest of it, but it is better now. It matches more closely with this side. They're not perfect, but it's pretty good. So yeah, I was thinking about these bits. I spoke to the body shop ages ago about it when I collected it, and they said, yeah, sorry, we didn't realise, we thought the wing covered it, and that's fine. The The other way round it is to put, you know, just paint it satin black or do something like that. It's just I wanted to lift the bonnet and everything to look like proper mint, which is why the engine bay got painted as well. This bit down the front you will never see, so maybe I'm being a bit overcritical. It's just, you know, when you're looking at it, you think, oh, I'll do it properly, but, you know, probably very little point as long as it doesn't rust. Finished poncing around with that bit. That's about as good as I can get it for the moment. Hopefully it won't need body shop work. What I might do is just buy a can of Hawaiian blue rattle can paint and see if I can touch in some of those bits myself. Just about to fit the drive shafts, so I've lubed up the outer end splines with copper anti-seize compound, and then I've just been cleaning a tiny bit of surface rust off the shafts where they go into the gearbox and lubricating them with the proper manual transmission fluid that these gearboxes need. And when it's all together, I'll refill the gearbox. Drive shafts are now in. That all looks good. One of the other things I scored at the scrapyard yesterday from that Rover 25 is this little bracket here, this plastic thing. It carries the power steering pipes and hoses. Ignore the fact that there are 2 low pressure returns at the moment. That's because I haven't worked out which one I actually want, but the high pressure coming out of the pump is now routed and terminated both ends. I just need to finally nip up that connection there. Basically, I can't remember where I got to on this. There's 2 different types of pump. Well, in fact there's more than 2, but depending on which pump you have a different size union end coming from the pressure relief valve there into your high pressure feed, which then goes down to the rack. This pipe I got off Ian from Essex. He broke a ZR that somebody had a special pipe made up, and I bought that off him along with that subframe. So this section here is actually made by Pertec with the correct union ends to go from my pump into my Rover 200 rack, which is a great thing to have because it saved me quite a lot of money probably having that made, and it makes for a nicer job. I'm not doing it with bodged up connections or anything, it's all properly terminated. And now I've got that bracket, it can be secured to the top of here properly. Then all I need to do is sort the low pressure return from the rack back into the reservoir, and then the low pressure feed to the pump, but that should be easy. So I've just been through my box of bits and pieces and spare O-rings and put a new O-ring on that lower connector, and also a bit of black silicone just for good measure, so I can terminate that, mount my little bracket, and then set about the other hoses. Just put the front bumper on loosely. It's a bit lower than it should be, so just put a couple of bits of tape to try and hold it up. Balance the BRM grille in there as well. I've got the radiator in without the slam panel support bracket, which would run from that bolt head down there up to here. But really just to see how much space there is in there for an intercooler. The Alley-Rad came with 2 fans on it already, and I guess whoever had that arrangement had the intercooler sitting forward of there. Probably they chopped up their front bumper. I don't want to do that. I want this sitting as sort of OEM factory as possible. The original intercooler would have been up here right at the top, and I'm questioning whether or not to go back to that kind of arrangement or put a big intercooler in the front but stack it. The problem is that if I do that, there's no way to get fans on the front side, obviously, because the intercooler's in the way. And on the back side, there's absolutely no room whatsoever because you've got the turbo there. You could put one on that intake side over there, but again, not ideal. So I'm going to go do some head scratching now and work out if I want to double stack them, quite how I'm going to do it. Done some proper cardboard engineering, which I shall now explain. Basically, the original intercooler that I was going to use was that one. This was the original one that I bought that had been mounted on an MG ZR, something like that, but it required a lot of the front bumper being cut, and also it had a very long pipe run because the hot gases, compressed air, comes out of the turbo there. It would have gone across the front of the car, down into the end of that bit, across the front, then back up around here, and then all the way up to the throttle body up there. So consequently, there's a lot of pipe work. There would have been a fair amount of lag, and would have been a bit pony really, plus it involved chopping a lot of the front of the bumper up, which I didn't want to do. I'm looking for the shortest possible pipe routing with the minimal amount of front bumper choppage. So I've been on eBay just randomly looking at different sorts of intercoolers, and I found this one. I don't know whether you're going to be able to see this, but it's for a Subaru Scion GT86. It's a top feed one, so rather than the pipes going in and out like a only conventional front mount intercooler, comes in at the top, circulates and goes out again. The size is not quite perfect, but it's probably workable. I've made myself up a cardboard template just to make sure that I'm not going crazy. The listing doesn't give all of the dimensions, but it gives you enough to work out that roughly, if that sits on that cross member like that, it should just about clear the underside of the slam panel, and also it should clear my top hose for the radiator. I'll need to remove that bracket, and I'll probably need to remove that bracket, but once this is all bolted up, it's actually fairly stiff anyway, so I'm not worried about that so much. The routing's going to be good. The only downside is that it's going to have to come out of here, do a 90 and then another 90 to go straight into the top of the intercooler over here, which is a bit of a ball ache. Not ideal, but then again, if you've got a turbo pointing upwards like that, then not really a lot you can do. I got cut off again because I've run out of batteries, but yeah, that's the kind of routing that was in the car, or not in this car, but that's the way somebody had done that particular intercooler installation. I'm definitely going to go with that. Haven't bought it yet, but I'm 99% sure I will do. Just put the headlight front bumper support beam thing in there, and the slam panel bracket as well. That will still need some chopping and fettling, but it'll go in there nicely. I just need to work out what to do about fans. Theoretically speaking, I probably could move the intercooler far enough forward to get a couple of slimline fans between the radiator and the intercooler. In terms of stacking, you're best off always putting the intercooler first, then the aircon rad, then the coolant radiator. That's what most manufacturers do, because air-to-air interchanges, like heat exchangers, like an intercooler, are pretty pathetically inefficient. So the air coming out of the intercooler probably isn't going to be massively heated by the intercooler itself, which means that when it does get delivered to the radiator, it's still got spare capacity to take heat out of that coolant. So as long as I can get enough airflow through it, I don't think stacking it will be a big deal. I still don't think I'll be able to get a decent fan on the back, so it's probably going to have to go in between. So I'm going to go away and Google thin fans, and maybe I'll have to make some sort of box to make sure it's efficient and actually sucking.